Imagine a fortress, walls several meters thick, as tall as a 5-story building, a double fortification system, impregnable, unconquerable. Throughout its entire history, no one had ever taken it by storm. Now imagine that it fell. Not to battering rams, not to siege weapons, not to an army, to shouting. Simply to the shouts of people who had walked around it silently for 7 days. Sounds absurd? That's exactly how it happened. This is a story about how obedience to God, even when His plan seems completely illogical, opens the door to miracles, and about how no one, absolutely no one, is beyond God's reach. The year was around 1400 BC. The place, the ancient city of Jericho, located in the heart of Canaan, the land that God had promised to give to the people of Israel. But between them and that promise stood these massive walls. The Israelites had just spent 40 years wandering in the desert. An entire generation had grown up knowing only sand, rocks, and endless horizons. They had left Egypt as slaves, witnessed the Red Sea part before their eyes, received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, survived on manna from heaven. They had seen miracle after miracle. Now they stood at the edge of the promised land, so close they could almost taste it. But first, they had to deal with Jericho. And Jericho wasn't just any city. It was a statement, a declaration of power. Its walls rose into the desert sky like a challenge. "Try to get past us," they seemed to say. "You can't." The guards on those walls looked down at the Israelite camp and laughed. What could these former slaves do against fortifications like these? They had no siege equipment, no advanced weapons. They were desert wanderers, not professional soldiers. Inside the city, life went on as usual. Merchants sold their goods. Children played in the streets. People slept peacefully at night, confident that their walls would protect them. After all, they always had. But someone in that city wasn't so confident. Her name was Rahab. She lived in a house built right into the wall of Jericho, not a place of honor. Her profession made sure of that. Rahab was a prostitute, an outcast even in her own city, the kind of person, respectable, people avoided. If you were making a list of people God might use to change the course of history, she wouldn't even be considered. But something was happening in Rahab's heart. She had heard the stories. Everyone in Jericho had heard them. Stories about the God of Israel who had dried up the Red Sea, who had destroyed the armies of Egypt, who had led his people through the wilderness for 40 years, feeding them, protecting them, preparing them. And Rahab, unlike the confident guards on the walls, unlike the comfortable citizens in their homes, unlike the king in his palace, Rahab believed those stories were true. When 2 Israelite spies entered Jericho on a reconnaissance mission, it was Rahab who hid them on her roof, risked her life for them, protected them from the king's soldiers who came searching. Why would she do this? She was about to lose everything. Her city was about to be destroyed. She knew it, could feel it in her bones. "I know that the Lord has given you this land," she told the spies, her voice steady despite the danger she was in. "Terror has fallen on us. Everyone who lives in this land is melting in fear because of you. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. Think about that for a moment. While the king was boasting about his walls, while the guards were laughing at the Israelites, a woman that society had rejected was seeing the truth more clearly than anyone else. She recognized the inevitable. She chose faith over fear, hope over despair. The spies made her a promise. When we come back to take this city, hang a scarlet cord from your window. When the walls fall, everyone in your house will be saved. A scarlet cord. A thin thread of hope hanging from a stone wall, a symbol of salvation in the midst of judgment. Rahab believed them. She tied that cord in her window, a splash of red against gray stone, visible to anyone who looked up. Meanwhile, outside the city, Joshua, the leader of Israel, was receiving instructions from God. And these instructions must have sounded like some kind of cosmic joke. March around the city once a day for 6 days, God said. Don't attack, don't even speak, just walk. 7 priests should go ahead of the Ark of the Covenant, blowing trumpets. But the rest of you, complete silence. Just march. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. Then, when you hear one long trumpet blast, everyone, and I mean everyone, shout as loud as you can, and the walls will fall down. Can you imagine being one of those soldiers? You've trained your whole life for combat. You know military strategy. You understand how sieges work. You've heard stories from your fathers about the battles they fought just to survive in the desert. And now you're being asked to walk in circles? No siege towers, no battering rams, no strategy that makes any logical sense. Just walk in silence. It was the kind of plan that, if it failed, would make you look absolutely foolish. There was no plan B. No backup strategy. No way to save face if this didn't work. It was all in faith or nothing. Joshua gathered the people, explained the plan, and to their eternal credit, the people obeyed. Day 1 arrived. The sun rose over the desert. The gates of Jericho were shut tight, barred from the inside. The guards on the walls watched, waited, curious. Then the procession began. 7 priests at the front, blowing ram's horn trumpets, long haunting notes that echoed off the walls. Behind them, men carrying the golden Ark of the Covenant, the sacred box that represented God's presence. Then came the army. Thousands of soldiers, armed, ready, but silent. No war cries, no chanting, no shouting. Just the sound of thousands of feet marching through the sand. The eerie wail of the trumpets, nothing else. They marched all the way around the city. Once. Then they turned and went back to their camp. That was it. On the walls, the guards looked at each other, whispered, started to laugh nervously. "What kind of siege is this?" one of them said. "Maybe they forgot their siege equipment," another joked. The laughter spread along the walls, but it was the kind of laughter that masks uncertainty. Because something about this wasn't right. This wasn't how armies behaved. This wasn't normal. Day 2. The same exact thing. The priests, the trumpets, the ark, the silent army. One circle around the city. Back to camp. The mockery continued on the walls, but it was quieter now, less confident. Day 3. The pattern repeated. By now, everyone in Jericho was talking about it. What were they doing? What were they waiting for? Some kind of psychological warfare? Inside the city, the confident merchants weren't quite so confident anymore. Mothers held their children a little closer. The king paced in his palace. Rahab stood at her window, watched the procession pass below, saw the scarlet cord hanging from her window, bright against the stone. She prayed, held on to faith. Day 4. Day 5. The laughter had stopped on the walls by now. The guards no longer mocked. They watched in tense, growing silence. Because with each passing day, with each repetition of this bizarre ritual, something dark was building. A sense of dread, of inevitability. "Why don't they just attack?" one guard whispered to another. "I don't know," came the reply, "but I don't like it." Below, in the Israelite camp, there were whispers too. Some soldiers muttered to their friends when they thought no one could hear. "How long are we going to do this? When do we actually fight? What if nothing happens? What if we've been walking in circles for nothing?" Doubts crept in like shadows. Questions gnawed at faith. But they kept marching, kept trusting, kept obeying the command even when it made no sense. Day 6 arrived. The tension was almost unbearable now. The Israelites marched. The same routine. Footsteps like the beat of a drum. Trumpets wailing their mournful song. The ark gleaming gold in the harsh sunlight. On the walls, the guards no longer stood casually at their posts. They gripped their spears with white knuckles, scanned the horizon constantly, looked to their commanders for reassurance that never came. Inside the city, people prayed to their gods, offered sacrifices, burned incense, anything to ward off whatever was coming. Because by now, everyone knew, everyone felt that something was coming. The king of Jericho sat in his throne room, staring out at those strange people circling his city like vultures. His confidence was crumbling. Yes, his walls were strong, the strongest in all of Canaan, built over generations, tested by time. But walls couldn't stop whatever power was behind this relentless, patient, methodical siege. Rahab checked the scarlet cord again, made sure it was secure, gathered her family, her father, her mother, her brothers, their families, and brought them all into her house. "Stay here," she told them. "No matter what happens, stay in this house. Don't leave for any reason." They looked at her like she was crazy, but something in her eyes made them listen. Night fell on the 6th day. In both camps, inside the walls and outside, few people slept. Everyone felt it, the weight of anticipation, the sense of standing on the edge of something monumental. Then came day 7. The sun rose blood-red over the desert. The air felt electric, charged, different. The Israelites assembled, but this time there was something else in the atmosphere, a sense of finality. This was it. They began to march. First circuit around the city. The priests blowing their trumpets. The army marching in perfect silence. The ark carried between them. On the walls, the guards counted. 1, they whispered to each other. The Israelites completed the circle and immediately started another. No pause, no rest. Second circuit. 2. Third circuit. Some of the Israelite warriors felt their hearts pounding now, sweat on their palms. When would it happen? 3. Fourth circuit. The guards on the walls exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. 7 times, the rumors had said. 7 times today, and then 4. Fifth circuit. Inside the city, people huddled in their homes. Streets empty. Even the bold and the brave had retreated indoors. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the moment before a storm breaks. 5. Sixth circuit. Every Israelite soldier could feel it now. Every man, woman, and child watching from the camp. The moment was approaching. The test of everything they believed. Everything they had been told. Everything they had trusted God for. 6. The walls of Jericho stood as they had for centuries. Massive. Impenetrable. Unmoved by the marching feet below, the trumpet blasts, the prayers and faith of those who walked around them. But faith isn't measured by walls that haven't fallen yet. Faith is knowing they will. 7th circuit. The Ark of the Covenant gleamed in the sunlight. The priests blew their ram's horns one more time. The army followed in complete, disciplined silence. Trust made visible. Obedience that defied every instinct of human logic. They completed the 7th circle. Came to a stop. The entire army now positioned around the city. Thousands of men. All silent. All waiting. Joshua stood before them. Raised his hand high. Then came the signal. One long, sustained trumpet blast that seemed to pierce the very heavens. And Joshua's voice rang out across the desert. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. What happened next was unlike anything the world had ever heard. Thousands of voices. Tens of thousands. Men, women, children from the camp. All shouting at once. Not a battle cry. Not a war chant. A shout of faith. Of victory claimed before it was seen. Of absolute trust in a promise kept. The sound was overwhelming. Deafening. It rolled across the desert like thunder. Hit the walls of Jericho like a physical force. And then, the impossible. The ground began to tremble. A low rumble that grew and grew and grew louder. The massive stones of Jericho's walls, stones that had stood for generations, stones that had seemed eternal and unchangeable, began to crack, slowly at first. Hairline fractures appearing in the ancient mortar, then wider. The cracks spreading like lightning across the face of the walls, racing from top to bottom. The guards on top stumbled, tried to keep their balance as the very foundations shook beneath them. Their screams were lost in the thunder of collapsing stone. The walls fell, not piece by piece, not section by section. They fell outward, completely, catastrophically, as if an invisible hand had simply swept them aside like toys. 40 feet of solid stone. Centuries of construction. The pride and confidence of Jericho. Gone in moments. The crash echoed for miles. Dust rose in massive, choking clouds that obscured the sun. When it finally began to clear, the sight was unbelievable. No barrier, no defense, no wall, just rubble, broken stone, shattered pride. And in the midst of all that complete destruction, one house stood, built into the wall, untouched, preserved by an invisible hand, with a scarlet cord still hanging from its window, bright red against the gray devastation. The Israelite army surged forward, not in wild vengeance, not in chaos, in disciplined awe, in trembling wonder at what they had just witnessed. The power of God made visible, the impossible made real. They found Rahab's house, brought her out safely, her and her father, her mother, her brothers, their families. Just as promised, every single person who had been inside that house walked out alive while the city around them lay in ruins. The woman society had rejected, the outcast, the one deemed worthless. She stood among the rubble of a fallen empire, saved, redeemed, future secured. Jericho fell that day, not because of superior military strategy, not because the Israelites had better weapons or more soldiers, not because they were stronger or smarter. It fell because God had said it would fall. And his people had believed him, had obeyed him, even when it looked foolish, even when it made zero sense, even when logic screamed that walking in circles would accomplish absolutely nothing. They had marched, they had trusted, they had shouted, and the impossible became reality. But here's the part that many people don't know. Rahab's story didn't end with her rescue. She married an Israelite man, had a son named Boaz. Boaz married a woman named Ruth. Their great-grandson was King David. And from David's line, centuries later, came Jesus Christ. Let that sink in for a moment. A Canaanite prostitute, a woman from the enemy city, an outcast who chose faith when she had every reason to choose fear. She became part of the direct bloodline of the Messiah. You can read her name right there in Matthew chapter 1, in the genealogy of Jesus. This is what redemption looks like. This is how God works. He doesn't just save you from your walls. He writes you into his greatest story. He takes the rejected and makes them chosen. Takes the outcast and brings them into the family. Takes the past everyone sees and creates a future no one could imagine. When everyone else looked at Rahab and saw only what she had been, God saw what she could become. Saw her faith, saw her choice, saw her place in the genealogy of grace. So what does this ancient story have to do with you? With your life right now? Everything. Because you have walls in your life too, maybe not made of stone and mortar, but just as real, just as intimidating, just as seemingly impossible to overcome. Maybe it's a relationship that's been broken for so long that reconciliation seems like a fantasy. Walls of hurt and bitterness and resentment so thick that forgiveness feels impossible. Maybe it's an addiction you can't break free from. Walls of habit and dependency that mock every attempt at change. Maybe it's a dream that's been deferred so many times, it feels dead. Walls of disappointment and failure that whisper, give up. It's never going to happen. Maybe it's a diagnosis, a mountain of debt, a destructive pattern, a painful past. Walls standing between you and the life you were meant to live. And you've tried everything, used all your strength, developed your strategies, exhausted your resources. Nothing has worked. The walls still stand. Here's what Jericho teaches us. Sometimes God's solution looks nothing like what we expect. Sometimes His plan makes absolutely no logical sense. Sometimes He asks us to do things that seem completely absurd to everyone watching. Walk in circles? Just trust? Keep going even when nothing seems to be changing? Yes, because God isn't looking for your strength to knock down those walls. That was never the point. He's looking for your obedience, your faith, your willingness to trust Him when the plan defies all logic. The Israelites didn't have to be strong enough to knock down those walls. They just had to be obedient enough to keep marching, faithful enough to keep trusting, patient enough to wait for God's timing. Think about those 7 days. Day 1, excitement and faith. Day 2, still confident. By day 3, questions starting to surface. Day 4, doubts creeping in. Day 5, wondering if this is really going to work. Day 6, almost ready to give up. Sound familiar? How many times have you quit on day 5? How many walls in your life are still standing because you stopped marching one day too soon? The miracle wasn't just in the walls falling. The miracle was also in the people who kept walking when nothing was happening. Who kept trusting when the situation looked completely unchanged? Who kept obeying when their faith was being tested by apparent silence? Day 6 looked exactly like day 5. Day 5 looked like day 4. Nothing had changed on the surface. But everything was building toward that 7th day, toward that moment when faith would meet fulfillment. Your day 7 is coming, but you have to keep marching through day 6. And if you're feeling like Rahab, like someone on the outside, someone with a past that disqualifies you, someone who doesn't deserve to be part of God's story, pay very close attention to this part. God didn't choose the king of Jericho to be in Jesus' family tree, didn't choose the priests or the respected citizens or the wealthy and powerful. He chose a prostitute who believed. Your past doesn't disqualify you. Your mistakes don't disqualify you. Your outsider status doesn't disqualify you. What matters is faith. Even small faith. Even scared faith. Even scared faith. Even faith that's hanging on by a scarlet thread. Rahab hung one cord in her window. One simple act of faith. One declaration that she believed the God of Israel was who He said He was. That small act was enough. That thin scarlet line became her path to redemption, to a new life, to a place in the most important story ever told. What's your scarlet cord? What small act of faith could you take today? What simple step of obedience could be your first move toward your own walls falling? The walls of Jericho fell in a moment. But that moment came after 7 days of faithful marching. After 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. After generations of waiting for promises to be fulfilled. Your walls might not fall today. They might not fall this week. But if you keep marching, keep trusting, keep obeying, they will fall. Because here's the truth that echoes from those ancient stones right into your life at this moment. The same God who brought down Jericho's walls is still in the business of doing the impossible. He's still powerful, still faithful, still keeping his promises, still using unlikely people, still redeeming broken pasts, still turning obedient, marching into miracles. Your Jericho is not too big for him. Your walls are not too thick. Your situation is not too impossible. So here's my question for you. What walls are you facing today? What impossible situation stands between you and your promised land? What has logic told you to give up on, but faith whispers to keep trusting? Start marching. Not in your own strength, not with your own plan, but in obedience to God's word, in trust of his timing, in faith that defies what your eyes see. Maybe your march looks like prayer, daily, persistent, even when you don't see immediate results. Maybe it looks like forgiveness you don't feel ready to give, obedience in small things, faithfulness in the waiting, holding on to hope when hope seems foolish. Keep marching. Through day 1 and day 2. Through the long middle days when nothing seems to be changing. Through day 6 when you're tempted to give up. Because day 7 is coming. And when it comes, when you've been faithful, when you've trusted, when you've obeyed, even when it made no sense, you're going to see your walls fall. Not because you were strong enough, but because God is. Not because your faith was perfect, but because God is faithful. Rahab's scarlet cord still hangs in the window of history as a reminder that no one is outside God's reach. That faith saves. That redemption is real. That even prostitutes and outcasts and people with pasts they're ashamed of can find themselves written into God's greatest story. The Israelites' marching feet still echo across the millennia as a reminder that obedience matters. That faith is worth it. That trusting God when it doesn't make sense is exactly when miracles happen. The ruins of Jericho's walls are still there in the desert today. Archaeological evidence of what happens when the impossible God meets human faith willing to obey. Your walls will join them. Your impossibilities will become testimonies. Your struggles will become stories that inspire others to keep marching through their own day. 6. Because when faith meets obedience, when we trust God, even when his plan seems absurd, impossible walls begin to fall. So here's my final question for you. Are you ready to start marching? Your Jericho is waiting. The scarlet cord of faith is in your hand. The command has been given. Now march. Trust. Obey. And watch what God does with impossible walls and believing hearts. The same God who brought down Jericho is fighting for you. Your day 7 is coming. Keep marching.